Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for the webinar. My name is Mary Galindo. I am the registered dietitian for Ornish Lifestyle Medicine, and today we're going to be talking about creating a healthy lifestyle through nutrition. If you have any questions, please go on Twitter and you can use the hashtag UCLAMDchat, or you can comment on Facebook. So today I would like to talk about how Ornish Lifestyle Medicine has shown us how participants have become plant-based and been able to sustain it over a long period of time. We'll talk about what the benefits are of going plant-based, why it's important to include whole foods when you're going plant-based, meeting protein needs, and how to sustain this lifestyle over time. So first, Ornish Lifestyle Medicine is a program that aims to reverse heart disease through a plant-based whole foods diet, along with other components like stress management, love and support, and exercise. Why I refer to our program is because most of the participants who come into the program are not initially plant-based, so it's a very big transition for them. Most of them have come into the program having animal products as their main source of protein all their lives. So through our program, we've been able to see over 12 weeks adherence to the program, but what's even more significant is after a year of doing the program, the participants have been able to stay 87.9% adherent, which includes the plant-based portion of the program. Now, the benefits are that many of their labs have been able to improve. So we see weight loss, we see a decrease in total cholesterol, specifically LDL cholesterol, which is the kind that can cause plaque in your arteries, a decrease in triglycerides, blood pressure, and if you have diabetes or prediabetes or have that in your family, hemoglobin A1C, which is a marker for blood sugar. So this is really great news, because if you, like myself, were initially skeptical of going plant-based and trying to sustain it over time, we're seeing that many people have been able to start this lifestyle and maintain it while reaping all the benefits. So why plant-based? Before I dive into this, I want to define what we mean by plant-based first. So when we talk about a plant-based diet, it's a diet that is mostly going to be based on fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds, plant-based proteins as well, and trying to decrease the amount of animal products that you're having or eliminate it altogether. So a typical American diet is usually high in animal protein, and with that comes some substances that can end up promoting heart disease. For example, saturated fat, trans fat, hydrogenated fat, and cholesterol. So this can promote heart disease and other chronic diseases. And I just want to show you real quick, in terms of heart disease, we're taking a look at an artery here in our body. And the arteries help your blood travel from your heart to your body and back. So over here we have a very clear, healthy artery. But if you start to see an increase in your diet of some of these substances like saturated fat and hydrogenated fats and cholesterol, eventually you can start to develop plaque in the artery, which is what we're seeing this yellow part represent. If you have too much of that, eventually what can happen is that you can actually clog your artery completely. And that means that you're not going to get any blood flow or minimal blood flow to the heart and back to the body. And that's where we see a heart attack. Now, we used to think that it was only the fats that contributed to the plaque in the arteries, but now we're finding that there's a substance called TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, that can also contribute. So we find components in the actual animal protein. So for example, choline in egg yolks and carnitine in meat, fish, and poultry that get converted into TMAO in our body. And when we have high levels of that, it can actually contribute to some of this plaque formation in the arteries and also contribute to other chronic diseases. So it's not just the amount of fat that's in animal proteins, but it's also the actual animal protein itself. So these substances, like I said, can lead to some inflammation, endothelial dysfunction, which just means that your artery, the lining of your artery, is not able to constrict or dilate properly, insulin resistance, and kidney stones, and eventually will lead to some chronic preventable diseases. So we have here heart disease, type 2 diabetes, renal disease, cancer, and some gastrointestinal disorders. Now, what I want to mention now is it's one thing to talk about how to prevent diseases and get the proper lab values, but it's another thing to know how it's going to affect you in your own life. So one of the things that we've learned about the patients in our program who've already had a heart event, maybe a heart attack or a stroke or have had surgery, one of the things that they always talk about after having those events is quality of life. So it's not just about preventing these diseases, it's how am I going to be living with these diseases and how is it going to affect me and my family? And I think it's important to think about that as a motivator for change, because if it's just about labs and numbers, you may not be as motivated to change. But I'm hearing from the participants after they've had one of these events, they want to be able to be around to play around with their grandkids or do things with their partner that they used to be able to do, or go to their daughter's wedding. And so this is very significant. They came into our program and made these changes because they want to be able to get back to a good quality of living. And so for those of us who have not experienced these chronic diseases or maybe have a high risk for it, it's important to think about these changes helping to not only increase our quality of living, but also the longevity that we have and how we interact with people. So why is it so important to be plant-based? What is the benefit? Why are plants such a powerhouse? So plants and plant-based and the plant-based diet is really important because plants contain fiber. So fiber is such an important component, and it has many different effects on the body. So if we come back to our artery here, fiber can actually help our body, specifically soluble fiber, to maintain your cholesterol levels at a regular level, but it can also decrease cholesterol levels if they're already high. So through eating plant-based foods, you can actually be at this point and start decreasing the amount of plaque in your arteries, which is really great news because it'll help to decrease your risk of having a heart attack or stroke. Fiber also really helps to slow down the absorption of sugar into the bloodstream. So if you're trying to watch your blood sugar levels, it's really important to include foods that contain fiber so that you're not having highs and lows. In addition to that, fiber can also help feed the gut bacteria. And we've probably heard a lot about the gut and how it's linked to other chronic diseases. And so it's a really great addition to your diet in helping to regulate your gut bacteria. So now, what's the difference between being plant-based and whole foods plant-based? So it is possible to give up meat, so you stop eating all the animal products that you used to, but still continue to have what we call refined carbohydrates, which are things like white flour, white rice, white pasta, the things that have been stripped of certain nutrients, specifically fiber. And while it's an improvement to swap out meat and use plant-based proteins, you're not going to get the full benefit of a plant-based diet unless you're including whole foods. Whole foods contain way more nutrition than refined carbohydrates. They contain phytochemicals, which are components that in plant-based foods that help to promote good health. And so in a sense, you have these fruits and vegetables and beans, all these plant-based foods that naturally contain medicine that help to promote good health in us and to prevent chronic disease. So here is an example of a whole grain. So as you can see, get this going, as you can see, there's different components of this whole wheat. So we have the endosperm, which contains protein, some complex carbohydrates, iron, and some B vitamins. We have the bran, which contains the fiber, the B vitamins, protein, and trace minerals, and we have the germ, which has B vitamins, fiber, and trace minerals. So you're probably seeing that we've already repeated fiber a couple times and protein. When you refine this whole grain to produce like a produce a refined flour, like a white flour, then you would actually be removing the bran and you would be removing the germ. And along with that, you would remove the fiber and protein, and again, the fiber over here, leaving you with a lot less nutrition in that refined carbohydrate. Why is that important? Well, remember when I mentioned that fiber helps to slow down the absorption of sugar in the body so you don't have those spikes and those drops? Well, here is a diagram illustrating that. So we have a candy bar. We have a candy bar which is made up of a lot of sugar and refined carbohydrates, so very low in fiber. And when you eat that candy bar, your body will digest it and ultimately start to release insulin. Many times with refined carbohydrates, your body overshoots. It releases too much insulin, and so your blood sugar will actually drop, not only to where you initially started, but it'll even go below that. And this will produce an effect, something that you may have experienced, a sugar crash, where you start to feel really tired and fatigued. And actually, most of the time, people feel pretty hungry immediately after eating. So instead of doing that, we could include a whole food, like a fruit, an apple, for example, which naturally contains sugar, and it has natural occurring fiber too. So what will happen here is you'll digest it, you'll release insulin, but not as much, and you'll get a gradual rise and fall in your blood sugar. Now, what this means in everyday life is that you will actually have a good amount of energy. You're not going to feel that crash that you did before. You're not going to drop below where you started, so you're going to feel satisfied for a longer period of time. And many of our patients who switched from a refined carbohydrate diet to a whole foods diet have found that their energy levels have improved over time throughout the day, so they're not feeling that crash around 2 o'clock. So I want to talk a little bit about how you get our protein needs. So the amount that we need is about 10 to 20% of total calories per day. Women, it'll be about 46 to 60 grams, and men, it'll be about 56 to 70 grams per day. So where are we supposed to get that from if we're not having chicken or steak on our plate? Well, there's a lot of different places to get it. So one of the things that I really love to include, and I really love to encourage others to include, are legumes. So things like beans, lentils, and dried peas. It's a very humble protein, but it is so chock full of nutrition. And so remember that fiber we talked about earlier that helps to keep your arteries nice and clear? Well, you're going to find a good amount of that fiber, the soluble fiber, in legumes. You're also going to find a good amount of protein and iron, which are both things that were found in your animal protein, as well as potassium and some zinc as well. So the thing about legumes is that they're very accessible. Everybody can access them. There's many different ways to prepare them, and most cultures already include some form of legume in their diet. So this is a really nice way to include a plant-based protein and to swap out with maybe some chicken or steak if that's what you were usually having at your meals. In addition to that, we have soy foods, and we have things like edamame, which are soybeans, tofu, tempeh, soy milk, and yogurt. Now, we're talking about minimally processed soy, not the kind that you would find in veggie meats. The reason why this is important is that minimally processed soy foods naturally contain all the essential amino acids. They're a good form of omega-3 fatty acids, and they have also been linked to reduce LDL, so the type of cholesterol that can lead to plaque in the arteries. Next, we're going to go to egg whites and non-fat Greek yogurt. So if you're not going to be vegan, if you're vegetarian and you're still including some of these animal products, these are good choices for you. They're very high in protein and they're very versatile. And the last is meat substitutes. And the reason why I talk about this last is because it is possible to go plant-based, to take out all the meat products that you used to have and then substitute it with veggie meats instead. And you may be thinking that you're getting all the benefits of a plant-based diet, but in fact, you're not. So meat substitutes are fantastic for people who are just starting out, who are used to eating meat all their life, and they miss the texture or the flavor of some of the things that they used to have. It's wonderful for people to transition, but it was never meant to be the primary source of protein. So the way I like to look at it is that you're going to try and get some legumes throughout the week, maybe some soy products, some of these egg whites and non-fat Greek yogurt, and you're just sprinkling those meat substitutes throughout the week, really to get you started and to also sustain a plant-based diet. They're not needed, it's not required, but for many people it really helps in the beginning. So other sources of protein, I want to go back to that whole grain that we were looking at. Now remember, we think about whole grains as having carbohydrates, and they do, but they also naturally contain protein in them. And so it's not just the protein that we found here that contributes to your daily protein, but it's also going to come from your whole grains, which if you are having only refined grains, you would really be missing out. So it's important to include those whole grains throughout the day. You actually have some protein in vegetables as well, non-fat dairy, nuts and seeds include some protein, and something called nutritional yeast, which if you're vegan, you're most likely very familiar with. It's very high in vitamin B12, and 1/4 of a cup can give you about 7 or 8 grams of protein. It naturally has a cheesy flavor to it, so you can sprinkle it on top of different dishes, almost like a Parmesan cheese. And if you were still doubting if you were going to get enough protein on a plant-based diet, we have a breakdown of a couple of examples here. So we can see that if we take a look at lentils that are cooked, 1/2 cup is about 9 grams, and easily someone could have a serving of a cup in a day, in a meal. If we take a look at quinoa, only 1/3 of a cup is needed and it'll provide 3 grams, but usually a serving is about 2/3 of a cup, so you'd get about 6. You have some whole grain pasta and bread that give you about 3 to 4 grams. Let's take a look at edamame, which is soybeans. 1/2 cup would give you 11 grams. And we have, let's see. Oh, and one thing I wanted to mention was if you get really sick of eating beans all the time in the natural form, which may happen, we now have bean pasta. So it's pasta, but it's actually only made of different beans. So we have garbanzo pasta, black bean pasta. You'll find it in all different types of shapes, and it's actually really common now in the store. So if we take a look, 3 ounces contains about 21 grams of protein, which is similar to about 3 ounces of chicken. So there are so many options here. Most of them are whole food, plant-based options, but we also have a sprinkling of some of the veggie meats, which are also really high in protein. So I hope that after going through all of this, you are confident that you'll be able to get enough protein with all the variety of different foods that a plant-based diet has to offer. Now, sustainability can feel daunting. You might think that, and I actually felt, how am I going to be able to do this for a long period of time? Anyone can do anything for a couple of weeks. So one of the things I always tell our participants is that it's really important to still keep the flavors that you're used to. So no one is asking you to give up any cultural traditions or the spices or flavors that you grew up on. It is possible to make these substitutions, but still keep those around so that you can sustain this lifestyle. One of the things that concerned me the most is how am I supposed to go home to my mom and eat her Mexican food if I'm plant-based? But what I found is that we were able to find a middle ground. One of the things she always has at home is fresh cooked beans, black beans and pinto beans. And they're delicious. And so we just started to substitute some of the meat for some of those beans, and we were able to have the same flavor profiles and the same comfort that comes along with her food without sacrificing all of that. So I encourage you to think and start at that point so that you can still enjoy some of those traditions. Up here we have many examples of different types of dishes that provide variety and color, which is very important. So here we have like a traditional kind of a pulled pork, but it's using jackfruit, which is something that's become really popular. You can have tacos without meat, and they're delicious. We have a stuffed pepper, kind of a Chinese chicken salad, but using veggie meat, which you could easily substitute beans for. We have a black bean burger and a Hawaiian style lunch plate here with macaroni and greens and some of the jackfruit that's barbecue. So it's really important to think about how you can include this and keep this going for the long run. So the model that I provide our participants is to use something that we call the plate method. So what I would suggest doing is you don't have to overhaul everything right away. In fact, that would be really difficult and you're probably not going to be able to keep it going for the long term. Instead, I would suggest trying to get at least half of your plate of fruits and vegetables. So next time you sit down to eat, take a look at what you're eating, and if your plate is full of meat and rice or some carbohydrate and there's really no vegetables, let that be your starting point. Try and get some color on your plate with vegetables. Then a quarter of the plate, take a look at what you're eating and see if are you having refined carbohydrates most of the time, or do you have some whole grains? And if you're finding that you're missing that, that's another switch that you can do. And then a quarter of the plate would be plant-based proteins. So once a week, like a Meatless Monday, or a couple times a week, try to substitute one of the plant-based proteins that we talked about instead of having chicken or steak or fish. And using this plate, you're going to find that there's a high amount of fiber, that health promoting fiber that we talked about. It's going to fill you up in the moment, but you're also going to feel satisfied for hours after. Also, you could see that there's a lot of color on here, so I really want to encourage you to use the health promoting elements that each fruit and vegetable have and each color has to promote health. They each have their own little package of health promoting qualities. And so this is a really great place to start. And again, you can make small steps or big steps if you like, but try and make steps that you feel like you can keep in the long run. Okay, so I think we have a couple of questions. Thank you. Okay, so one of the questions is, isn't plant-based more expensive? So we get this question all the time. While it is true that if you shop at only Whole Foods or some of the higher end grocery stores, your bill can come out pretty pricey. But really, some of the steps I just talked about really only required increasing the amount of vegetables and decreasing the amount of meat or animal products, which actually costs more than those vegetables. So in actuality, that is not going to be as expensive. Beans are also very cost effective, and so including some beans, especially if you get them in the bulk containers, can also keep your bill down. And usually the veggie meats are the ones that are going to cost a little bit more, and again, it's not required to include that in your diet. You can go to the 99 Cents store, which has tons of fruits and vegetables. They have beans available there as well. At a great price. Also at Grocery Outlet, which is a place that has a lot of healthy food items for a lot less expensive. And you can always shop for seasonal fruits and vegetables if you want to try to avoid a hefty price for getting something out of season. Another question is, isn't it harder to eat out? Well, here in Los Angeles, we are pretty lucky because we're at a time right now where vegetarianism and veganism is exploding. And so we are finding that restaurants are really catering to this population. So I could say with confidence that you could pretty much go anywhere and find an alternative to their meat products. So they usually will have like a veggie burger, have some beans on hand. But I'll even say that if you're not ready to give up meat, then just trying to increase the amount of vegetables that you're having on your plate would be very easy, because now most places have a side of steamed vegetables that you can ask for too. And last, where do I start? So I would encourage you, if you feel overwhelmed to feel that you have to give up meat, I would reframe that and try to think about adding more vegetables and more fruits into your diet, and naturally that'll cut down on the amount of meat that you're consuming. It's a great way to start, and there's always going to be health benefits to adding more fruits and vegetables and trying to get different colors. When you're ready, I would suggest starting small, so cutting out maybe chicken and doing that a couple times a week and playing around with recipes that include beans or some of the other plant-based proteins. There's no need to go day and night to change overnight and take everything out of your diet, because ultimately it's going to be really hard to sustain. So try to give yourself some grace and just start slow, and try to also create a challenge with your friends or family. So when you're in competition, things always get a little more interesting. So you could do this with coworkers, have a potluck, make it something that you can connect with other people instead of isolating. And I think that's all for our questions. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It's been a pleasure, and I hope that you feel empowered to make some changes. And thank you.